Hey, welcome everybody to day 18th, April 21st, as we work our way through National Poetry Month. We cannot go through National Poetry Month without thinking of quite possibly our favorite poet in the world, Georgia Hurd, longtime prolific writer, a longtime friend of both Penny and myself. So we're super happy that Georgia, you're here with us, and I'm talking a little bit more than normal today because Penny is fighting a little bit of bug and she has 2 grandchildren behind her.
That's right. That's why I got the blurred background down here taking care of the grandkids. Every once in a while they may crawl in the lap. You never know. They are poems, Georgia.
They are poems. They are poems. And I hope they do crawl in your lap so I can.
So we're so happy to have you. I wanted to say, I've been reading this blog and I've been sharing it with Penny from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of all people, who's writes this very thoughtful, it's about culture. It's really not about sports. And he always recommends books and movies and things. And so I bought this book that he recommends, Poems That Make Grown Men Cry, 100 Men and the Words That Move Them, which I've halfway through. And then there's Poems That Make Grown Women Cry, each selected by a woman. So each poem is selected and the person, by famous people, and they have like a few paragraphs of why that poem is meaningful to them. I'm just really enjoying them. Beautiful. Although they're very different in the sense that, at least on the man's side, it's very white, Eurocentric, old poems. It's not like contemporary stuff, you know, but it's poems, some that I've read years ago and loved, and some that I've never read. So I really enjoyed that as well.
That sounds amazing. And have any of them made you cry, Kelly?
I would say for public consumption, no.
Oh, I want to know. Come on.
But there's a couple that have moved me, really have moved me. And then there's some I'm like, what? I don't get it. But I don't know. I love them. But I want to say too that, you know, that we love your work, Georgia. We've used your poems. In fact, maybe we could put a link to Star Stuff, one of your most recent films that was put to one of your poems on the link. But I just say that Penny and I have used your poems in the classroom a lot, and kids really like them.
Thank you.
We really like them.
For sure. The list poems book's still one of my favorites. I just love
heart maps are amazing too.
Thank you. I have a new heart maps I'm working on for adults. And
oh, wow.
Map Your Heart, Chart Your Life, I think is the working title. And it should be out sometime maybe next summer, but the design is so beautiful. And there's lots of different kinds of heart maps. So I've been immersed in that, which is such great work. Because I always, before I write about a heart map, I always have to do it first. And I learned so much of what feels authentic and what doesn't, and what's real. And sometimes they just don't work. And then I know, and I just chuck them. So I have about 30 new ones that I'm working on.
Can't wait for that. So we were speaking before we went live here, you know, how prolific you are, that you've written somewhere around 20 books. And we're kind of wondering, like, what do you have a routine? Like, is there a certain, are you pretty regular as a writer? Is there a certain kind of day? What's your process like?
You know, I wish I could say it was a regular disciplined process, but because, as you know, when you're working on a book, it's very different from and you have a deadline. It's very different from when you're just writing every day in a journal. Or
do you hear that, Penny? Do you hear that part? Just wondering.
Wait. What is this disrespect here? What's going on?
Yeah, what is going on? What's behind that?
I'm just saying, you know, when you're writing towards a book, sometimes it's a little different than just whatever you want to do in your notebook. That was an interesting idea. That's all I'm saying.
Are you thinking that those things don't separate for me, that I'm still doing whatever I want in my notebook, and that's a problem for you? That's what I'm hearing.
I'm pulling her leg because basically when she writes in her notebook, something brilliant comes out of it and makes it way into our books.
Of course. Yeah, I know.
It's true that it doesn't change though. I'm still writing in my notebook, and then I'm also working on the book, but I hear you.
Well, you probably are better with deadlines. I mean, my deadlines are, I'm a procrastinator. And so when I have a deadline, I have a book due in 2 weeks. So
Wow.
it's no, not really. It's probably 6 months. And so not that, I have this new Heinemann book that I'm writing on teaching poetry, and it's been a long time to just writing in my journal and just mulling things over and researching. And now the deadline is real, like last Monday. So it's a different process, and because I really have to sit down and I write all day long, and I wouldn't usually do that. Hello, hi, cutie.
Hi, Lila.
Sorry, look at those cheeks. She's so beautiful.
When you're writing poetry, not necessarily for a book or not necessarily for a deadline, like I write early morning. I think Penny writes early morning. What about you?
Yeah, definitely in the morning. I'm not past 4, I don't write at all. And usually it's in the morning because, I feel open. My heart is open. My mind is open. I don't have a lot of the obligations that come in during the day. So definitely in the morning. And I do write in my journal pretty regularly, although lately I have these notepads that I've been using. So now I have a stack of about 5 of them where I'm starting different projects and different poems in those notepads, and I have them right over there. I hid them. But so I mean, I think that it's important for me to keep writing. Otherwise, I feel it's harder to get the words out. Even if I take a day or 2 off, I feel really just like exercise, I feel rusty, and I feel like I just have to kind of get into it. And I always read before I write, always. That's really important process for me. And it could be books. I mean, I have a whole bunch of books here that I read. This is my new favorite. It's not a poetry book, but, oh, okay. So maybe I'll turn the background off. This is such.
We can see it
You
if you
can
hold
see
it
it.
by your
Okay,
face.
okay.
Yeah.
Wait, okay. Okay.
Yeah, there you go, right there.
There. It's called Gathering Moss. And have you heard of this author? Robin Wall Kimmerer. And believe it or not, it's about moss. She's a scientist. She's the director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. But it is poetry, and she writes about moss, but also the preface is called Seeing the World Through Moss-Colored Glasses. And it's about first learning to see. And when she was in kindergarten, she went outside and there was snow, and her teacher, Miss Hopkins, had a magnifying glass. And the snowflakes fell on her coat, and everybody came up with the magnifying glass. And she said the lens and the snowflake were an awakening, the beginning of seeing. It's the time when I first had an inkling that the already gorgeous world becomes even more beautiful the closer you look. And the whole thing is about really looking at the small, which I think is so much about poetry. So I usually have this on my desk, and I read blogs. I read, do you know the website Marginalia? I used to read the Brain Picker, right? So I read some of the stuff there, and then I write. But I feel like I need to read other words because it feels like I'm not alone then, and I have company. So that's really important for my writing process.
I love how you said that there's an openness to morning writing. I feel that too. You're not cluttered yet. You're not filled with the day. Exactly. Which is why I got up early when I was still teaching at the high school, right? Got up super early because I just needed to have some space to write.
Yes, exactly. And after that, I mean, really after 4, with emails and all the other things that come in, I feel like my brain is a little bit.
You make it till 4, really?
Yeah, when I'm on deadline.
Yeah.
If I have the time.
It's noon for me.
Oh, really? Well, you probably start earlier.
Yeah, I start pretty early, but
yeah.
Penny and I've been thinking, we've been writing about it. We wrote a little bit about it in our last book. We're so concerned about this sort of fear of poetry, K-12, kids are afraid of it. teachers are afraid of it. And yet Penny and I have found that poetry is such a launch pad to get kids to write and think and to be engaged in the classroom. I'm wondering what you think about sort of this. I mean, do you get a sense of that as well?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, we've been doing this a long time, and poetry is people, I mean, it's changed some, I think, especially after the pandemic. I feel like people are a little bit more open to it. And that's because there were so many poems that were happening, you know, online and virtually, and people joined groups. But it's really rare to have, you know, to feel like poetry is embraced in the schools. And I think part of that is the pressure of, oh, I have so many things to do. You know, I have to get this done, and there's testing and this and that, as if poetry doesn't have a part in the real world. And I believe that poetry absolutely can teach kids about writing. As you all know, it can guide conversations, you know, really deep conversations about all kinds of things. And also there's so many different kinds of poems, right? There's poems that use research and nonfiction. And I do believe that people are afraid of it, but I think that's changing. And I hope that because of your books and others, that it will change even more. And I think that there's such a need now for teachers to pay attention to kids' hearts, and poetry, of course, is the genre of the inner life. And you don't have to, the thing I think that a lot of teachers feel is that, oh, I don't know anything about poetry. And really, you don't have to know anything about poetry. You just have to be open to it, and to begin reading it and learn with your students. I mean, I think that's why I keep doing this for so many years, is that I learn something new every time I'm in a classroom. They teach me and they guide me. And I think that if we have that kind of open spirit about teaching as well as writing, I think that that's the best way to teach poetry.
That's beautifully said. I think you talk like a poet.
Thank you.
You do. It's just,
well, it honors too. It honors, you know, the kids' background and approach. In fact, this is kind of random and off the top of my head, but one of the things that I liked really a whole lot that you had talked about somewhere was this idea of picking a poem that's autobiographical. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a project that I first started when my grandmother had passed away. She was 99. This was many, many years ago. And it was my last grandparent. So it felt like there was a chapter closing, and I'd become very close to her. And a friend of mine made a little anthology of poems about life and death. And these are, you know, poems that we know, and then some unknown ones, you know, After Apple Picking by Robert Frost, but also Crowfoot of the Blackfoot, What is Life? There were so many beautiful ones. And so what happened to me was that, I mean, I had read After Apple Picking so many times in high school, right? But all of a sudden, after my grandmother passed away, it took on a different meaning for me. It meant something so much deeper. And all of these poems in this anthology. So I began to ask myself, have students ever really chosen poems that kind of match what's on their hearts? So I called it a self-portrait anthology, because I love art, and I know artists paint these self-portraits, right? And when they paint them, they don't actually paint a mirror image. They paint what they feel like. So I wanted kids to choose a poem to reflect how they felt inside. And when I first started it, I had no idea how it was going to go. And the key was to have a lot of different kinds of books there, you know, not just Shel Silverstein and Jack Perletsky, but a lot of different kinds of books. And it was amazing, the books that kids chose. And then they choose one poem that's a self-portrait, and they copy it down exactly as it's written, and they write a reflection. And then for many years, that was it. They had this beautiful portfolio of self-portrait poems. But then I realized I was missing something, which is something that we do all the time, which is when you read, it also sparks your own words and your own poems. So I added on that different layer, that third kind of layer of it, where they write their own poems based on their self-portrait poems that they chose. So it started out as just a reflection of how they feel, and then it broadened into other facets of autobiographical, facets of identity. So, people can choose experiences, memories that they've had, but it's all very personal. And I think this is the way in to poetry for all of us, right? We pick a poem, as you said, not every poem's going to speak to you. And what your poem might not speak to me, but if you choose a poem that you feel like, yes, this is me, this is a reflection of who I am and what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, all of a sudden there's a bridge, and you feel like, oh, I get poetry. That's what it's about. It's not about taking from the, looking at the craft and all that from the outside. So yeah, that project it's really profound to watch students so immersed in reading poetry with a focus. It's not just reading a book. It's trying to find yourself in a poem, which changes reading, I think.
Mm.
I think one of the interesting things you're talking about, though, is it's not that the poem itself is a measurable substance, something that we read so much about with education, right? Teachers are always trying to quantify, what is it that students did here, right? Can I name it? Can I rubicize it? Can I grade it? And this is much more of an exploration of identity. And as you said, kind of honoring their hearts. And
Yes.
to do that, I feel like I always had to move to like a portfolio evaluation to say, fill your portfolio with all these poems that represent who you are. You choose the ones you think are the most important. You decide the order, and then we have some kind of criteria, because as teachers, we're always trapped by that. What am I putting in the grade book?
Yes.
But I think with poetry, it can be just, it is so reductive of what a poem is. It's this many similes or particular devices, or demonstrate the ability to. And I think we miss the entire value of poetry when we do that.
Absolutely, because it really is looking, it's more like a scientist kind of looking from the outside rather than from the inside, which is, you, and it doesn't mean that you can't study craft, right? We know that if you love a poem, you're going to try to figure out how this works, right? How did this poet make me cry? How did this poet make me feel like I'm not alone in the world? And when you start to write, then you can borrow those craft tools. But to start from the outside to figure out, okay, so what about these line breaks? What about the meter? What craft tools? There's no sense in it. It really becomes an intellectual exercise. And, I think that does destroy poetry for a lot of people, because then they feel like it's more of a quiz, it's more of a test, it's more, it's not something that is meaningful. So, and
Or
that's
worse, that the teacher has the answer, then you have to try to figure it out.
That's right. Yeah, that is so true. And one of the things that I suggest that people do, and I do this all the time, is find a poem that's after you've read a lot, after kids have read a lot of poetry, find a poem that is a difficult poem to decipher, like an Emily Dickinson poem, right? Or, there's so many poems, and bring it into the classroom. And as a teacher, something that I have never, or I've read maybe a couple times, but don't quite understand it, and start from the same page and say, okay, we're going to figure this out. And these are some of the ways that we're going to unlock this, the door of this difficult, not difficult, but a poem that is thick. And so you have to do a little bit of work to understand the meaning. And then you're on the same page with the kids, and it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm ignorant because I don't get this poem, right? So.
Penny and I talk, of course, about that a lot in the writing process, right? You have to model the wrestling match in front of the kids.
Yes.
And I remember, Penny, one time you said in a workshop that we did that you actually watched AP, I think it was AP history teacher, take the test in front of the kids and struggle and think out loud and, do that wrestling in front. And I think that the same principle applies here. Like, if you model that this is a mystery to you as well. And that's actually part of the beauty of it. I mean, Penny and I laugh because we went online and we found rubrics for grading poems. And, you know, and I wrote a poem and I scored myself a D or a C on the rubric, but I also scored an Emily Dickinson poem, a C or a D on the rubric as well.
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean, it's like, we have these practices that kill reading. We have these practices that kill writing, and we have these practices that kill poetry. When there's a beauty in reading, there's a beauty in writing, and there's a beauty in poetry.
But I think it goes back to that, make it a measurable substance thing, because teachers feel caught by this, how am I going to grade it? And that destroys what we love about writing is the discovery. I didn't know I was going to think that. I didn't know that was in my head today. And all of a sudden I want to write about that. That's the joy. And my students find it if they're writing freely next to poetry that is not graded, that is an exploration, and then they find something they want to develop. But as long as it is always, here's a perfect poem and we're going to analyze it, and we're going to do that day after day, I'm never going to have the confidence. I certainly never did. In fact, how many times, Georgia, have I said to you, well, I'm not a poet? And you'll say, yes, you are. I still can't believe I'm a poet because I was so well trained in what perfect poetry was that I was never going to get to. And when I finally began playing with it, I still didn't feel enough confidence to want to share it really very much, just with students.
It's interesting because that, you know, that so many of us are taught that poets are, I don't know, just not regular people, like people who are, you know, that you know something more, that you're in a university at the ivory tower of poetry, whereas, you know, the democratization of poetry, I think that's so important to call ourselves poets if we write, right? Because we call our students poets, right? So to try to embrace that, I know that because you're so humble, you know, I think, you know, that's where it comes from. And that's a beauty in and of itself, right? That you're reluctant to call yourself a poet. But yeah, I was just reading on Twitter, somebody said, finally, I get to call myself a poet. And I thought, I mean, this person had written many books, and I thought that's such an interesting reluctance, you know, that there's I don't know, a kind of almost a sacredness about it. But we really need to just democratize it, I think, and say that if you write poetry, you can call yourself a poet. And there's so many different kinds, right, of poems. So.
One of the central arguments of our poetry chapter in 4 Essential Studies is that it's been traditionally taught upside down. Yes. And that analysis has sort of been the centerpiece of a poetry unit, where we argue creation should be the centerpiece, that creating next to poems, whether creating prose or poetry next to poems, is really what should be the centerpiece. You're not going to see yourself as a poet if you never dabble in it.
Right. That's true. And even there's that great thing about, you know, Cynthia Ryland has a long quote. I forgot where it comes from, but she said there was a boy that came up to her and described a hardware store in her hometown. And he described it like a poet with all the details and just so beautiful. And she said that he never would think of himself as a poet, but he is the true poet. Even if he didn't write it down, it's there. So, and I think that reluctance to, you know, to even write it down, because that poetry, being a poet doesn't belong in my world. I think that that's another thing we have to shatter. And yeah, so I love, you know, what you guys have done with poetry is so profound and beautiful and makes so much sense in the classroom. And you've made such a difference, especially in secondary school, you know.
That's kind of you. Right now I have a poem growing at the bottom of the stairs. Grandma, are you done yet? Can't you just see the poem?
That's the title.
Absolutely, yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up here, you shared with us one book of poetry that's on your desk, and I know this may be an unexpected question. Are there any others within reach that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I just, you know, well, this one, I don't know if you know the James Cruz. Let me see if I can get that. Do you know the anthology?
that book so much. And have you seen the new one that just came out?
Yes, Path to Kindness.
The Path to Kindness I'm reading right now every morning. Those two are my favorites.
Me too. So I love just dipping into this, and I have, I just dog ear it all the time. And then there's some great children's poetry that's come out. I love this book. It's very short. It's called Delicious. And it's Julie Larius, and poems celebrating street food from around the world. And it's very playful. It's, for elementary, but I love her language, and it's international street food from around the world. I love that one. So there's so many beautiful books that are coming out and have come out of poetry for the classroom. It's just, there's just so much. So yeah, those are the main ones: The Gathering Moss, How to Love the World. And I have a whole drawer full back there that I just take out and read and dip into.
I think we need the big H section of our library. Heard. There's so many good things in those books. I love Poems of Comfort, the one that you put out during the coronavirus.
Thank you.
Lockdown.
Yeah,
beautiful collection. So many of your poems.
Thank you. Field Guide to the Heart. Yeah,
that was yes.
Yeah, that was really kind of healing to do during COVID. Just to write with a friend and send poems back and forth.
We
that
felt
kind
the
of
same way.
partnership is great.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. We wrote
felt the same way.
almost every day.
It anchored us in some way in such an unsettling time.
Absolutely, and a lonely time. We felt just so alone, and this was a way to share words and
so disconnected from so many things that were regular for us. And so I think that it really made a difference to have, I don't know, somebody that you were sharing it with, but also writing with.
It's true. It really is. And then, just what I loved is having that deadline of, every Friday we would share poems, and no matter what state they were in, we would share. And so it kind of took the pressure of, you have to have a finished poem. That's a wonderful. So I know a lot of times in classrooms, we ask students to write independently, but I think partnerships are really important, where you can write off. There's a part in my new book about collaborative poetry, and, Kwame does this with crowdsourcing, right? Where you each take a line, but there's so many different, the ringa, which is a traditional Japanese form. I love that idea of collaboration.
Love that. Hopefully things are cleared up by November, and hopefully you'll be on your way to Anaheim at NCTE so that we can actually hang out together.
I hope so. That would be really wonderful. I think it probably will happen.
Yeah, I'm hoping. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Always great to catch up with you, Georgia. It was not hyperbole when I said you may be our favorite poet, although that's going to piss somebody off when I say that. But
thank you. You're so good to see you. Great. I love to have conversations with you. I really do. Could do it all day.
All right.
Good to see you, Georgia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Everybody, and we'll see you again next time.
Bye.